Light does not always behave the way the eye expects. Certain yellow gemstones appear brighter than their color alone should allow, not because they shine more intensely, but because they manage light with unusual precision. Some concentrate illumination into narrow paths. Some split it into sudden flashes. Others seem to hold it quietly beneath the surface, as if the crystal itself were slowing light down. And surprisingly, this effect is not limited to the rarest stones. From widely accessible minerals to collector-level gems, each of the next 10 examples reveals a different reason why yellow can appear almost self-luminous. Number 10 begins with a stone often underestimated, yet capable of producing a glow few viewers anticipate. Ranked 10th, citrine, the unexpected, beginning of light. Brightness is often associated with, yet some gemstones produce an impression of internal light without extreme scarcity, without record-breaking prices, and without the prestige typically expected from high-performed citrine quietly challenges the assumption that luminous appearance must come at a premium. Under controlled lighting, well-cut citrine reveals a type of clarity that feels almost architectural. Light does not merely strike the surface, it travels cleanly through the crystal structure, encountering fewer internal disruptions than many viewers expect from a stone often categorized as accessible. The result is not aggressive sparkle, but a steady presence of illumination that appears to gather within the gem itself. Its color plays a crucial role in this perception. Unlike darker yellow stones that absorb portions of incoming light, citrine's warm golden tone allows brightness to pass through with minimal resistance. The eye interprets this combination of transparency and hue as something unusually calm, yet undeniably radiant, an effect sometimes described as contained sunlight. Cut precision enhances the illusion. Facets act not only as reflective surfaces, but as directional pathways, guiding light deeper into the stone before returning it outward in a controlled manner. This interaction produces a glow that appears stable rather than flashy, continuous rather than fragmented. For collectors, this behavior introduces an interesting paradox. A gemstone widely available can still display optical qualities that feel unexpectedly refined. The perceived value emerges not solely from rarity, but from how efficiently the crystal manages light. Citrine demonstrates that luminosity does not always rely on complexity. In certain cases, fewer internal obstacles allow brilliance to appear more concentrated, more legible, and more immediate. Seen beside more saturated or heavily included yellow stones, the difference becomes clear. The brightness does not compete for attention. It sustains attention. This quiet intensity makes citrine a fitting starting point. It establishes a foundation for understanding how structure, transparency, and color interact to create the impression of internal illumination. And as the next stones reveal increasingly complex ways light can be manipulated, one idea becomes difficult to ignore. Brightness is not always about cost. Sometimes it is about how little stands in the way of light itself. Ranked 9th. Sphene, when light refuses to stay whole. White light usually arrives as a single beam. Inside Sphene, it does not remain intact for long. The crystal interacts with incoming light in a way that forces it to separate, fragment, and re-emerge as sudden flashes of spectral color. Instead of a uniform glow, the eye detects quick bursts of yellow, green, and fiery orange appearing almost simultaneously, as if the stone were briefly revealing multiple layers of light at once. This effect originates from an optical property known as dispersion, the ability of a material to bend different wavelengths of light by different amounts. In Sphene, dispersion is exceptionally strong, meaning white light entering the gem is divided more dramatically than in many better-known stones. Each wavelength exits along a slightly altered path, producing rapid color flashes that feel unusually vivid. Unlike the calm, steady brightness seen in the previous stone, Sphene introduces movement into the perception of light. Small changes in viewing angle can trigger a sudden appearance of color where none seemed visible moments before. The result is not merely brilliance, but activity. An impression that light is being actively reshaped within the crystal, rather than simply reflected from its surface. This visual behavior often surprises collectors encountering Sphene for the first time. The intensity of its dispersion can exceed expectations formed by more familiar gemstones. Under directional lighting, the flashes can appear sharper, almost electric, giving the gem a dynamic character that contrasts strongly with softer yellow stones. Yet despite this optical performance, Sphene remains relatively unknown outside specialist circles. Its softness compared to harder gems limits everyday wear, which has historically reduced its visibility in mainstream jewelry. As a result, one of the most optically expressive yellow gemstones often exists outside public awareness. From a visual standpoint, Sphene demonstrates that the sensation of glowing light does not always come from uniform brightness. Sometimes, the impression emerges from controlled separation. Light breaking apart, reorganizing, and returning to the eye with heightened intensity. Placed after a stone defined by clarity, Sphene shifts the narrative from quiet illumination to energetic light behavior. It reveals that brightness can also be created through complexity, through internal optical tension, and through the delicate balance between structure and spectrum. As the sequence continues, the next gemstone explores a different phenomenon entirely, one where color itself becomes so concentrated that light appears thicker, almost tangible. Ranked 8th. Yellow apatite. When color becomes light itself. Intensity sometimes emerges not from reflection, but from concentration. Yellow apatite displays a type of chromatic strength that changes how brightness is perceived. Instead of relying on sharp flashes or mirror-like brilliance, the stone presents color in a form that appears unusually condensed, almost as if light has been gently compressed into a richer visual substance. Certain specimens reveal a saturation level that feels strikingly modern despite the mineral's long geological history. The yellow does not drift toward brown, nor does it fade toward pale transparency. It holds its position in a narrow range of vivid warmth, allowing the eye to interpret the color as luminous rather than heavy. This distinction plays a subtle but powerful role in the illusion of glow. When color becomes too dark, incoming light is absorbed. When color becomes too pale, brightness may appear diluted. Yellow apatite often sits in a precise optical balance where hue and transparency cooperate rather than compete. Light passes through the crystal and returns with enough chromatic density to feel substantial, yet not obstructed. Under focused lighting, the gem can appear almost energized, producing an impression closer to illumination than simple coloration. The brightness does not fragment into rainbow flashes as seen in highly dispersive stones, nor does it rely solely on clarity. Instead, the visual impact comes from how efficiently the crystal sustains color intensity while still allowing light to travel freely within its structure. For viewers unfamiliar with apatite, the effect can feel unexpectedly contemporary. The saturation evokes associations with electric tones more commonly linked to modern materials than natural minerals. This subtle sense of visual unfamiliarity often increases perceived brightness, as the mind interprets the color as unusually vivid for something formed deep within the earth. Collectors sometimes note that apatite's appearance can feel almost artificial at first glance, not because the stone lacks authenticity, but because its chromatic concentration challenges expectations of how yellow gemstones typically behave. Placed at this stage in the sequence, yellow apatite introduces a key idea. Glow does not always require dramatic optical physics. Sometimes, the perception of light emerges from the purity of color itself, a balance where saturation strengthens brightness rather than suppressing it. As the progression continues, the next gemstone reveals how transparency alone can amplify luminosity, allowing light to travel deeper and return with surprising depth. Ranked 7th. Heliodor. When light finds depth. Some gemstones impress at first glance. Others reveal their full character only after the eye begins to notice how far light is able to travel inside them. Heliodor belongs to the second category. Its visual strength does not rely on sudden flashes or unusually intense saturation, but on something more subtle, the ability to transmit light deep into the crystal with remarkable continuity. Instead of appearing bright only at the surface, the stone often displays a layered illumination that seems to extend inward, creating a quiet sense of dimensional glow. This effect is closely tied to the internal purity frequently found in well-formed beryl crystals. When inclusions are minimal, light encounters fewer interruptions along its path. Rather than scattering randomly or dissipating prematurely, illumination moves with relative coherence, returning to the eye with a smooth, stable brightness that feels calm, yet unmistakably present. Heliodor's color contributes to this perception in a distinctive way. The yellow is often softened by subtle greenish undertones, allowing the gem to maintain clarity without appearing overly pale. This tonal balance supports the sensation that light is not only reflecting from the exterior facets, but residing deeper within the crystal's internal space. Under controlled lighting, certain specimens appear almost architectural in their optical structure. Light enters, travels, and exits with minimal distortion, producing a type of visual depth that can feel more immersive than stones relying purely on surface brilliance. The glow is not immediate or explosive. Instead, it unfolds gradually as the viewing angle shifts, revealing how transparency can influence brightness just as strongly as dispersion or saturation. Collectors often appreciate Heliodor for this composed behavior. Its optical performance does not demand attention through dramatic flashes, yet it rewards prolonged observation with a steady impression of internal clarity. The brightness appears anchored rather than scattered, giving the gem a sense of visual stability that can feel unexpectedly refined. At this point in the sequence, a new dimension of luminosity becomes clear. Brightness can emerge not only from intensity, but from depth. When light is permitted to travel farther within a crystal before returning outward, the resulting glow carries a sense of structure, a quiet complexity that invites closer inspection. The next gemstone introduces a different mechanism altogether, where the physics of refraction increases the efficiency with which light is redirected back to the viewer, intensifying brilliance without requiring extreme saturation or dramatic color effects. Each step reveals another way in which yellow gemstones reshape light, not simply reflecting it, but guiding it with increasing precision. Ranked 6th, yellow zircon. When light moves faster than expectation, age rarely reveals itself through brightness. Some crystals formed hundreds of millions of years ago appear visually quieter than their younger counterparts. Yellow zircon defies that pattern. Despite its geological antiquity, the stone interacts with light in a way that feels unexpectedly energetic, returning illumination with a precision that often surprises even experienced observers. The reason lies in refractive index, a measure of how strongly a material bends light as it passes through. In zircon, this value is notably high, meaning incoming light slows, shifts direction, and remains within the crystal longer before exiting. Each internal redirection increases the probability that light will return toward the viewer rather than escaping through the back of the stone. This repeated bending produces a brightness that feels concentrated and efficient. Instead of diffusing broadly, light appears to circulate within the gem, reinforcing the impression that illumination is being retained rather than merely reflected. The effect can appear almost engineered, as though the crystal were designed to preserve luminosity across multiple internal pathways. Color plays a supporting role in this interaction. Yellow zircon typically exhibits a warm tone that allows strong light return without overwhelming the eye with excessive saturation. The balance permits brilliance to remain legible, making the internal activity easier to perceive even under moderate lighting conditions. Cut quality significantly enhances this phenomenon. When facet geometry aligns with the optical properties of zircon, light can be redirected repeatedly before emerging, amplifying the perception of brightness. The result is not explosive dispersion nor neon saturation, but a concentrated brilliance that feels stable and intentional. Because zircon is often mistaken for synthetic substitutes or overlooked in favor of more familiar gems, its optical performance can feel particularly unexpected. The visual behavior contradicts assumptions formed by name recognition alone. What appears at first to be a modest yellow gemstone can suddenly reveal a level of light efficiency associated with far more widely discussed stones. Within the progression of this sequence, Zircon introduces the idea that luminosity can be intensified not only by clarity or color purity, but by the physics of how light is redirected internally. Each shift in direction increases the likelihood that brightness will return to the observer, strengthening the sensation that the gem is actively preserving light within its structure. As the midpoint approaches, the next gemstone alters the experience once again, not by increasing intensity, but by changing how brightness behaves depending on viewing direction, creating the impression that illumination itself is in motion. Ranked 5th. Andalusite. When light changes its mind. Rotation reveals what stillness conceals. Viewed from one angle, Andalusite may appear restrained, presenting a warm yellow tone that feels stable and composed. Yet with the slightest shift in orientation, the brightness reorganizes itself. Subtle variations emerge, and the internal color balance appears to adjust as though the light itself has reconsidered its path. This visual behavior results from a property known as pleochroism, the ability of certain crystals to display different colors depending on the direction from which they are observed. Rather than maintaining a single uniform appearance, Andalusite allows light traveling along different crystallographic axes to interact with the structure in distinct ways. Each orientation filters wavelengths slightly differently, producing variations that can range from golden yellow to softer, almost honey-like nuances. Unlike dispersion, which separates light into multiple colors simultaneously, pleochroism alters how color is perceived as the viewing angle changes. The shift does not occur abruptly, nor does it fragment into flashes. Instead, the brightness seems to reorganize gradually, creating the impression that illumination is adjusting internally in response to movement. This dynamic behavior introduces a new dimension to the idea of glow. The light does not simply appear present within the stone, it appears responsive. As the gem is rotated, certain facets intensify while others soften, allowing brightness to seem directional rather than fixed. The result is a quiet but persistent sensation that the crystal contains more than a single visual state. For observers accustomed to gemstones that present a consistent appearance, this adaptability can feel unexpectedly engaging. The eye becomes aware that no single angle fully represents the stone's optical character. Each shift reveals a slightly altered balance of brightness, encouraging closer examination and longer visual attention. Placed at the midpoint of the sequence, Andalusite serves as a turning point in how luminosity is understood. Up to this stage, brightness has been shaped by clarity, saturation, and refractive behavior. Here, light demonstrates something more fluid, an ability to appear mobile without relying on dramatic flashes or intense sparkle. As the progression continues, the next gemstone reveals how crystal structure itself can influence the efficiency of light return, producing a form of brilliance that feels increasingly precise and controlled. Ranked 4th, Chrysoberyl. Precision. Written into the crystal. Symmetry can determine how light behaves long before a gemstone is ever cut. Within Chrysoberyl, the internal arrangement of atoms forms an orthorhombic structure that guides light with remarkable efficiency. Instead of allowing illumination to scatter unpredictably, the crystal lattice promotes controlled movement, directing incoming light along stable pathways that support consistent brightness across multiple viewing angles. The visual result is clarity that feels intentional. Light does not appear to struggle as it enters and exits the gem. It travels with a sense of order, returning outward in a manner that appears sharp, defined, and highly legible to the eye. This quality distinguishes Chrysoberyl from stones that rely on dramatic flashes or unusually intense color saturation to capture attention. Brightness here feels disciplined rather than explosive. The refractive properties of Chrysoberyl contribute to this impression. While not reaching the extreme values of diamond, its refractive index is high enough to produce strong light return when combined with precise cutting. Facets act as calculated surfaces rather than decorative features, supporting internal reflections that maintain intensity without producing visual chaos. Color stability further enhances the perception of internal light. Yellow Chrysoberyl often presents a tone that remains consistent under varied lighting conditions, allowing brightness to appear anchored rather than fluctuating. This steadiness reinforces the impression that the crystal is managing light efficiently at a structural level, rather than relying on external conditions to create visual impact. Because the stone rarely displays excessive inclusions, the internal environment remains relatively unobstructed. Light is able to enter, interact, and return without significant interruption, strengthening the sensation of a contained yet focused glow. The effect can feel almost technical in nature, less about spectacle, more about optical precision. Collectors often appreciate Chrysoberyl for this balance between performance and restraint. It demonstrates that luminosity does not always require dramatic color intensity or extreme dispersion. In certain crystals, structural organization alone can produce a level of brilliance that appears both refined and highly controlled. At this stage in the sequence, the concept of glow evolves once again. Light is no longer simply passing through the gemstone or shifting with angle. It is being guided by the internal architecture of the mineral itself. As the progression approaches the final tier, the next gemstone introduces a form of brightness long associated with prestige, where recognition and optical performance intersect to create a signature visual identity. Ranked third, yellow sapphire, recognition built on light stability. Certain gemstones become widely recognized not only because of tradition, but because their visual performance remains reliable across generations of cutting styles, lighting conditions, and cultural preferences. Yellow sapphire occupies this position with quiet authority, offering a form of brightness that appears balanced rather than exaggerated. Corundum, the mineral family to which sapphire belongs, possesses a crystal structure known for durability and optical consistency. This stability allows light entering the gem to interact with a lattice that remains structurally resilient under everyday conditions. As a result, the stone maintains clarity and brilliance over time, reinforcing its long-standing reputation in fine jewelry. Unlike gemstones that rely on extreme saturation or unusually strong dispersion, yellow sapphire produces a type of glow that feels composed and trustworthy. Light is reflected with enough intensity to create presence, yet without overwhelming the natural tone of the crystal. The yellow hue often appears refined, neither overly pale nor excessively deep, supporting a perception of brightness that feels continuous rather than dramatic. This equilibrium contributes to the gem's historical appeal. Across different cultures, stones capable of maintaining visual stability have often been favored for objects intended to endure. The consistency of appearance ensures that the stone continues to display its intended character under varied illumination, preserving the impression of contained light even as external conditions change. Cutting techniques further emphasize this behavior. Well-proportioned facets help direct light back toward the viewer with minimal leakage, reinforcing the sensation that brightness is concentrated within the gem rather than dispersed outward. The resulting glow does not compete for attention through rapid flashes. Instead, it sustains visual interest through dependable brilliance. Placed near the top of the sequence, yellow sapphire represents a convergence of recognition and optical performance. Its presence confirms that the perception of internal light is not always linked to novelty alone. In some cases, the enduring appeal of a gemstone reflects the reliability of its interaction with illumination. This stability prepares the transition towards stones where brightness intensifies further. The next position introduces a gem whose optical behavior approaches the upper limits of light return, demonstrating how multiple optical properties can combine to create a heightened impression of luminosity. Ranked second, yellow diamond, where light reaches maximum discipline. Few materials have been studied as extensively for their interaction with light as diamond. When nitrogen becomes part of the crystal lattice, the familiar structure takes on a yellow coloration while preserving the optical performance that has defined diamond's reputation for centuries. Inside this tightly bonded carbon framework, light encounters an environment engineered by nature for efficiency. The refractive index is high, meaning incoming rays slow significantly as they enter the crystal, bending sharply and increasing the likelihood that they will return toward the observer rather than escaping unnoticed. At the same time, dispersion separates portions of white light into subtle spectral components, adding complexity to the overall brightness without overwhelming the primary color. The result is a form of illumination that appears both powerful and controlled. Instead of producing scattered flashes, the stone maintains a disciplined brilliance, where each facet contributes to a unified visual effect. The yellow tone introduces warmth to this performance, softening the contrast often associated with colorless diamonds while preserving the structural precision responsible for their optical intensity. Cut geometry plays a decisive role in maximizing this behavior. When proportions are carefully aligned with the refractive characteristics of diamond, light entering through the crown reflects internally multiple times before returning outward. Each reflection reinforces the sensation that brightness is being retained within the stone, producing a glow that feels concentrated rather than superficial. Unlike gems defined primarily by saturation or transparency, yellow diamond demonstrates how multiple optical properties can work together simultaneously. High refractive index increases light return, controlled dispersion introduces subtle chromatic variation, and exceptional transparency allows illumination to travel with minimal obstruction. The combination creates a perception of brightness approaching the upper threshold of what natural crystalline materials can achieve. Positioned just before the final reveal, yellow diamond establishes a benchmark for luminous performance. It illustrates how structural perfection can guide light with remarkable consistency, setting the stage for a gemstone whose visual character introduces an entirely different interpretation of internal illumination. In the final position, brightness does not simply return to the eye. It appears to accumulate within the crystal itself, creating the impression of light in its most fluid form. In first place, Imperial topaz. When light appears to become fluid. Some gemstones reflect light. A rare few seem to hold it. Imperial topaz occupies this final position because its interaction with illumination creates an impression that feels less like reflection and more like suspension. Instead of producing sharp flashes or directional brightness, the stone often presents a continuous glow that appears to exist within the crystal itself, as though light had slowed just enough to become visible. This perception emerges from a combination of transparency, internal reflection, and chromatic layering. Fine imperial topaz typically forms with a level of clarity that allows light to penetrate deeply into the crystal before encountering internal surfaces capable of redirecting it back outward. Each internal interaction contributes to a gradual accumulation of brightness, reinforcing the illusion that the gem contains light rather than merely returning it. Color plays a subtle but critical role. Imperial topaz often displays a golden tone enriched with faint orange undertones, producing warmth that enhances the sensation of depth. The hue does not overpower the returning light, nor does it dilute it. Instead, it creates a visual environment in which illumination appears softened, yet intensified simultaneously. When cut with precision, the gem's facets act as coordinated entry and exit points for light traveling through multiple internal pathways. Rather than dispersing abruptly, brightness moves with a measured continuity that allows the eye to perceive a stable internal presence. The effect can feel almost atmospheric, as though the crystal were filled with a faint yet persistent radiance. This visual behavior distinguishes imperial topaz from stones defined primarily by sparkle or color intensity alone. The glow here feels cohesive, sustained, and unusually calm. The eye does not chase flashes across the surface. It observes a steady field of luminosity that appears anchored within the gem's structure. Collectors often describe this phenomenon as a form of visual liquidity. The light does not fracture into sharp fragments, nor does it appear fixed in a single location. It seems distributed throughout the interior space, creating a perception of fluid continuity that shifts gently with movement while never fully dispersing. Placed at the conclusion of the sequence, imperial topaz completes the progression from simple brightness to the illusion of contained radiance. Each preceding gemstone demonstrated a different way light can be shaped, through clarity, dispersion, saturation, refraction, or structural precision. Here, those ideas converge into a single impression: light slowed enough to be seen, and once observed, difficult to forget. Light is often mistaken for a simple surface effect. Yet within certain yellow gemstones, illumination behaves less like reflection and more like structure, guided by transparency, shaped by crystal symmetry, intensified by the precise balance between color and clarity. Some stones concentrate brightness into quiet depth. Others separate light into subtle complexity. A few create the rare impression that luminosity is not merely observed, but contained. What appears at first to be color alone is often the visible outcome of highly specific geological conditions working in precise alignment. And once the interaction between light and structure becomes visible, gemstones are no longer perceived as static objects. They become optical events, shaped as much by physics as by beauty.